Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of your favorite podcast, The Fantasy Birds. We're back with another buy low, sell high trade episode. Trade deadline's right around the corner, and we also got some waiver wire guys for you to pick up just in case your trade deadline is passed. What sticks out to you on this list right here?
Yeah, so I'm going to say these first three names. I'm going to just briefly touch on all of them. It's pretty easy to see why. First of all, Norman Powell is going to be a little bit unique in that he's just been flame throwing recently. His numbers have been off the charts, and he started off the first half of the season playing really well. But most of us would have expected Norman Powell to kind of cool off by now, and he hasn't fallen off to the degree that we think he should. However, I think there's good reason to think that he won't put up these types of numbers going forward. Two out of his last 5 games, he received 37 and 38 minutes. 3 out of his last 5 games, actually. He's gotten at least 37 minutes. That kind of bucks the trend of the recent amount of minutes that he's been getting on average. And that's usually gonna inflate his recent points total. Not to mention that he's been shooting really well from the field, scoring double digits in all of his recent games. And while I do expect the double-digit scoring to continue, I don't think he's going to be shooting as well as he has been. So I think Norman Powell is going to be a guy to potentially sell high on if you still want to get decent value, especially with the trade deadline coming up tonight. Another guy to look at, we're going to look at these 2 Lakers right here. LeBron James's injuries kind of rocked the fantasy world. If you have LeBron James on your team, you're trying to do everything you can to try and recoup some value. One way to do that is Dennis Schroder. All right, when LeBron James is in that lineup, he basically is a vacuum for the ball. He has a high usage rate. And between him and Anthony Davis being out, this is going to create a massive usage vacuum that has to be filled by someone. And I think Dennis Schroder is going to take another leap forward. This is another one of those situations where I don't think past production in recent games can really tell the story of what's going to happen going forward. I think Dennis Schroder is a good bet just to see an increased usage. He'll get more shots. He'll be more involved in the offense. I think it's going to be simple as that. Montrezl Harrell is another guy that should be able to benefit from LeBron James's absence. He's a little different because he's not a guard and he's not the type of player that can create his own offense necessarily. He's going to have a lot of that distributed to him in terms of, passes in the dunker spot, lobs, pick and rolls, that type stuff. So it's going to hurt in that regard. However, he will see an increase in usage, probably inefficient usage. But Montrezl has been balling out ever since Anthony Davis has been out anyway. In 5 of his last 6 games, he scored at least 34 fantasy points. He's been more than a serviceable back-end starter if you need him to be. He's been very disappointing all year, but his numbers with Anthony Davis out, it have been basically more in line of what you expected when you drafted him in the first place. And I see that continuing as long as Anthony Davis is out. And we're going to monitor that. We're going to see how long Anthony Davis is out because that's kind of a theme with him. You never really know. But yeah, I'm going to say that Dennis Schroder and Montrezl Harrell are 2 guys on the Lakers that you want to buy stock in now just to kind of get in on that increase in usage before it's too late.
We saw this from Dennis Schroder last year with the Oklahoma City Thunder playing with the Chris Paul. His usage rate was higher than it was with the Lakers. We expected to get back to there with a LeBron James injury, and he was putting up pretty good numbers last year. So we expect him to be fantasy relevant down the stretch for the fantasy playoffs. On the flip side, Anthony Edwards for the Minnesota Timberwolves, very high usage player, extremely high usage, takes a ton of shots. Very athletic prospect, number 1 overall pick in the draft. He's been averaging around 30 points in the last 4 games. He's been blowing it out of the water. With a LaMelo Ball injury after the year, we might see Anthony Edwards try to take over for that Rookie of the Year. However, Malik Beasley, 12-game suspension, that's coming to an end. D'Angelo Russell is working his way back from injury. So Anthony Edwards is a very high volume player, and he relies on that to get his fantasy production. Those guys coming back in the backcourt, Anthony Edwards is not going to have as many opportunities down the line. So Anthony Edwards, some guy we're trying to get off the board for the playoffs because we don't think he's going to be very valuable once those guys come back and his usage comes down. Another guy we want to sell is Kawhi Leonard. Kawhi Leonard, a very overrated player. I'm just kidding. Kawhi Leonard, a very good player, but it's just the fantasy playoff schedule. 3 weeks
You had me
straight
for a sec, not gonna lie.
3 weeks in a row, Kawhi Leonard only has 3 games a week. That could be the difference in a fantasy matchup down the stretch. So a guy who's just the schedule doesn't work out for Kawhi Leonard. Also for Paul George, any of those Clippers players, if you can sell them for a guys just around their value, not too high, not too low, I think it would pay off down the stretch because that could be a 40-point difference in a fantasy week setting. So just the setting, 3 games a week, tough for Kawhi Leonard, 3 straight matchups, not something we're excited for Kawhi Leonard owners.
Oh, real quick before you go to your next one, I actually just remembered something about Norman Powell too, and it goes to the same thing that we said about Kyle Lowry a couple of weeks ago. Norman Powell, if he keeps playing like this, there's a good chance Norman Powell would be at the bottom tier of your lineup essentially for the playoffs. And if that's the case, you have to watch out because the Raptors only play 2 games for. No, the Raptors only played 2 games for one of the first 2 weeks of the playoffs, so you have to be careful with that. So yeah, you might see a decrease in production for Norman Powell, and you'd only get 2 games out of him. Might be a good reason to sell.
Yeah, no, it's very important to consider these playoff schedules when you're making these trades at the end of the trade deadline, because even if you're trading a guy who averages more points on a week, if he's got less games coming down the stretch, a guy who averages 40 compared to a guy who averages 45, if that guy who averages 40 is playing one more game, I mean, that's a good amount of points right there. So something to consider. You got to look at your players' schedules going into the playoffs. And Kawhi Leonard, not a guy we like schedule-wise in the playoffs. The guy we do like is Ja Morant. He's been averaging around 14 and 5 assists the last 4 games. He's a 20 and 7 player over the entire season. So we think those numbers will get back to normal. Not only will the production be better from Ja Morant, but the schedule is amazing. The Memphis Grizzlies actually have the most games left to play in the NBA. So his playoff schedule is packed. Ja Morant is going to have 4 games almost every single week for the Memphis Grizzlies in the playoffs. A guy, if you can get him on your team, especially cheap right now, going to pay dividends with increase in production and the increase in the games played over other players. So those are our buy and sell guys for the week. Now we got some waiver wire guys, just in case your trade deadline's passed. You still need to make some moves. We start off with Danilo Gallinari. What have you seen from Danilo Gallinari in the previous games?
I think it's pretty simple. I think it's just Danilo Gallinari under a new coaching staff. Lloyd Pierce getting fired recently from the Atlanta Hawks has kind of reshaped that rotation. It's kind of changed the way they've done things. And I think Danilo Gallinari has been a big benefactor for that. He's gone from a player that you don't basically want to own in any formats to a guy that is putting up starter numbers. I mean, he's going to give you 30 plus fantasy points a night for the most part. If you're looking at his production over the last couple of weeks, I think it's very simple. He's getting between 25 and 35 minutes a night. So you're not really going to see him have a decrease in minutes. I think this is something that is sustainable. Maybe not in dynasty formats, but definitely something for the end of the year when, especially you have a coach coaching on an interim basis. I think they're trying to light a spark, and doing so might be giving the ball more to an established veteran player. I really like what I've seen out of Danilo Gallinari, and I see no reason as to why it can't continue for the rest of the season.
Gallinari, he's got to keep that shooting up if he's going to hold his value. So if he can stay hot from the floor, he's definitely going to provide you numbers for fantasy points leagues. But Talen Horton Tucker, a guy we're also adding, kind of similar to Dennis Schroder and Montrezl Harrell, just because LeBron James' injury. Talen Horton Tucker actually over the last 4 games pre-injury, he was averaging around 13, 5, and 6, decent numbers. But in the last game when LeBron was injured, his minutes soared from 21 a game to 28 in the last game. So we think he gets a bump up in production. Not someone who's going to win your league by any stretch, but someone, if you need someone at the back end of your lineup, Talen Horton Tucker could provide some much needed production there. Kind of similar to Moses Brown with Oklahoma City Thunder, backup center. If Al Horford is to be traded, not likely, but Moses Brown, we've seen if he's able to get the minutes over 28 minutes a game, the last two games he's had 28 minutes, he's been over 13 and 14 rebounds. So if this guy can get the minutes for that Oklahoma City Thunder team, he's going to have production. It's just whether they want to give it to him. I mean, it's a very young team. They're not going to the playoffs, even though they're competing for that last playoff spot with the 10 team making playoffs with that play-in game tournament. We don't think Thunder will be there. So Moses Brown, if he can get playing time for the future for that team, Moses Brown, a guy we looking to stash on our bench just to see what happens. Nothing crazy, but you never know, especially this deep into the year. You're scribing for people on the waiver wire. So Moses Brown, someone we're looking to add just for a stash and play and see where it goes. But that's going to wrap it up this week for the Fantasy Birds. We had buy low, we had sell high, we had some waiver wires. We'll see you guys next week with another episode of the Fantasy Birds.